My name is Sloan, and am 28 years old. I stood alone in a sea of graduates at Columbia Business School, clutching my MBA diploma while watching families cheer around me. The 3 seats, I'd reserved, sat empty. My father chose my half-brother's Little League game over my graduation. No call, no text, just silence. As I walked across that stage to scattered applause from strangers, something inside me shifted. I didn't know it then, but that empty chair would become the catalyst for everything that followed. The moment they dismissed my achievement was the moment I stopped needing their approval. Before we dive into how a $5 million penthouse changed everything, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Have you ever been overlooked by your own family? Hit that like button if you've ever felt invisible to the people who were supposed to celebrate you most. And subscribe because this story gets wild. Trust me, what happens next will make you rethink everything about family loyalty and success. Now let me take you back to where it all began, because the betrayal ran deeper than just one missed ceremony. Growing up in Austin, Texas, I learned early that love in my family came with conditions I could never quite meet. My father, Warren, built an oil empire worth $12 million, but when I was 12, he remarried a woman named Delilah, who was only 20 years older than me. She brought with her a son, Trent, who became the golden child overnight while I faded into the background like yesterday's news. Every accomplishment I earned, valedictorian, full academic scholarship to undergrad, Dean's List every semester, was met with distracted nods and quick subject changes. Meanwhile, Trent's participation trophies lined the mantel like Olympic gold. His barely passing report cards celebrated with expensive dinners I wasn't invited to attend. I gave my family 3 months' notice about my Columbia graduation. I sent the formal invitation, called to confirm, even booked them discounted hotel rooms near campus. My father promised he'd be there, said he was proud, told me he wouldn't miss it for the world. But the week before my ceremony, Delilah discovered that Trent had made regional baseball playoffs. Never mind that he warmed the bench most games, and his team had a losing record. She launched her campaign immediately, weaponizing guilt with surgical precision. Family should support each other, she told my father over dinner while I listened on speakerphone from my tiny Brooklyn studio. Trent needs our encouragement. He's struggling with confidence. Surely I could understand that my brother needed them more than I did. 2 days before graduation, my father called with a voice so cold it could frost glass. He wasn't coming, he said flatly. No apology in his tone, just finality. I tried to keep my voice steady as I reminded him this was my MBA from Columbia, that I'd worked 6 years for this moment, balancing full-time jobs with night classes, surviving on 4 hours of sleep, and instant ramen. His response shattered something fundamental inside me. You're already successful, Sloan. You don't need us there, but Trent needs confidence building. You understand, don't you? It wasn't a question. My younger sister Maeve, 19 and still living at home, was forbidden from attending by Delilah's decree. Only my godmother Celeste made the trip, sitting in those 3 empty seats looking furious enough to start a war. The ceremony passed in a blur of numbness. I walked across that stage, shook hands with the dean, posed for official photos with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Afterward, I returned to my 400-square-foot studio apartment alone, setting my diploma on the rickety table and finally letting myself cry. That's when I made the mistake of checking social media, a decision that twisted the knife deeper. My family had posted 57 photos from Trent's game, which his team lost spectacularly. Delilah's caption read, "Family first. So proud of our boy," with hearts and celebration emojis. Not a single mention of my graduation, not one acknowledgement that I'd even accomplished anything worth noting that weekend. When Celeste arrived an hour later, she found me staring at my phone with tears streaming down my face, and that's when she revealed the truth I'd been too naive to see. Your father has been systematically cutting you off financially while building Trent's trust fund into something massive, she said quietly, her hand on mine. The favoritism isn't just emotional. It's calculated and financial, and it's been happening for years while you were too busy surviving to notice. 1 month after graduation, I accepted a position at a prestigious Manhattan venture capital firm with a starting salary of $250,000 plus performance bonuses. I moved into a better apartment in the Lower East Side, Nothing fancy but leagues beyond my studio, with actual separate rooms and windows that let in real sunlight. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I aggressively attacked my student loans, threw myself into work with the focus of someone trying to outrun pain, and started building the life I'd always imagined. Independence felt like oxygen after years of suffocation, and I was finally free from needing anything from the people who'd made me feel small my entire life. That fragile peace lasted exactly 6 weeks before my father called with unusual warmth in his voice, asking how I was doing, commenting on the weather, making small talk that immediately triggered my suspicion because Warren never did small talk. Then he got to the point with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "We need to discuss your grandmother's estate, sweetheart," he said, using an endearment he hadn't spoken in years. My grandmother, Warren's mother, had passed away 2 years earlier, leaving a trust fund to be divided equally among all grandchildren when the youngest turned 21. My share was estimated at $400,000, money that represented not just financial security, but my grandmother's belief in me when no one else seemed to. Warren's next words felt like a physical blow. "We've decided Trent needs your portion for his college fund," he announced, as casually as discussing the weather, as if he were asking me to pass the salt rather than surrender my inheritance. Before I could formulate a response, Delilah's voice joined the call, dripping with false sweetness that barely concealed her venom. "You have a degree and a good job, Sloane. You don't need the money like Trent does. He has nothing, no prospects, no opportunities." The implication hung heavy that this was somehow my fault, that my success obligated me to subsidize Trent's lack of ambition. I found my voice and objected, pointing out that this was legally my inheritance, that my grandmother had specifically stipulated equal shares in her will, that this wasn't their decision to make. Delilah's mask slipped instantly, her voice turning razor sharp. "You've always been selfish. This is exactly why we didn't come to your graduation," she hissed, and in the background I could hear Trent laughing and adding, "Yeah, nobody cares about your stupid business degree." My father, the man who'd raised me for 12 years before Delilah entered our lives, delivered his ultimatum with bureaucratic coldness. "Sign over your share voluntarily or you're not welcome at family holidays anymore," he said flatly, as if banning me from Thanksgiving dinner was equivalent punishment to theft. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the phone as I refused to sign anything, my voice coming out stronger than I felt. I hung up and immediately consulted a lawyer who confirmed what I already knew. The inheritance was legally protected. They couldn't touch it without my signature. Their demand was essentially blackmail. But knowing I was legally right didn't stop the flood of nasty texts that arrived within hours from every family member Delilah had turned against me. Within 24 hours, Shed launched a full campaign throughout our extended family, spinning a story where I was trying to steal Trent's college money, portraying herself as the protective mother fighting off the greedy stepdaughter. I watched in real time as the family group chat I'd been part of since high school turned into a tribunal. Cousins and aunts and uncles I'd known my entire life condemning me based on complete lies. Only Maeve sent a secret text that simply said, "I don't believe them. I'm sorry," before Delilah confiscated her phone. That night I blocked most of my family on social media only to discover they'd already blocked me first. I hired an aggressive attorney who sent a cease and desist letter so thorough it could have been used as a legal textbook, securing my inheritance with ironclad protection and making clear that any further harassment would result in lawsuits. My lawyer's final warning echoed in my head for weeks afterward. "They'll retaliate," he said seriously, his eyes sympathetic behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Be prepared for this to get worse before it gets better." I laughed bitterly, unable to imagine how it could possibly get worse than being cut off from my entire family over money that was rightfully mine. I had no idea how naive that assumption was, how Delilah's capacity for destruction was only just beginning to reveal itself. 3 months passed and I started to believe maybe the worst was over. I threw myself into work and earned a promotion to senior analyst, started dating a successful architect named Garrett, who made me laugh and didn't flinch when I explained why I never talked about my family. I was healing in the way you do when you realize the infected wound was the relationship itself, that cutting it out allowed you to finally stop hurting. Life felt like it was finally moving forward, like I was building something real and solid that nobody could take from me. I should have known better than to trust peace that felt that fragile. Delilah launched her masterpiece on a Tuesday morning when I woke to 17 missed calls from friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Shed created an elaborate fake Facebook account, complete with stolen photos and a fabricated identity, and used it to post detailed lies about me throughout every social circle I'd ever been part of. The posts claimed I'd stolen money directly from my dying grandmother's bedside, that I'd abandoned my family in their time of need, that I had a serious drug problem I was hiding behind professional success. She didn't just post these lies randomly. She strategically targeted my childhood friends, former teachers, neighbors from our old Austin subdivision, the congregation of the church where I'd been baptized. Each message was crafted perfectly to exploit existing relationships, presented as a concerned family member warning people about my supposed true character. By the time I discovered what was happening, the damage had spread like wildfire through dry timber. But Delilah wasn't satisfied with destroying my personal reputation. She wanted my professional life too. An anonymous email arrived at my venture capital firm's HR department, filled with accusations of fraud, embezzlement, and claims of unstable mental health, complete with forged documentation. My company had no choice but to launch an internal investigation, and for 2 weeks I worked under a cloud of suspicion while colleagues whispered and avoided eye contact in the hallway. The final blow came when Garrett's parents received an anonymous package containing fabricated documents claiming to prove I had a criminal history, complete with fake mugshots and court records that looked authentic enough to fool anyone who didn't look too closely. Garrett didn't break up with me immediately, but I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes, the way he started asking careful questions about my past, the distance growing between us like a crack in ice. The situation reached its breaking point when my godmother Celeste suffered a heart attack and was rushed to a hospital in Austin. I caught the first flight out, my heart hammering with fear that I'd lose the one person who'd consistently chosen me. At the hospital, I ran directly into Warren, Delilah, and Trent in the cardiac wing waiting room. Before I could even ask about Celeste's condition, Delilah launched into a performance worthy of an Oscar, her voice rising loud enough to attract every nurse and visitor within earshot. "You have the nerve to show up here after what you've done," she shrieked, gesturing dramatically and listing my supposed crimes for the audience of strangers. My father stood silent, his face blank, refusing to defend me or contradict a single lie. Trent filmed the entire encounter on his phone, his face lit with malicious glee, already composing the mocking caption he'd use when posting it online. Hospital security was called, and I was removed from the building despite being listed on Celeste's visitor authorization, unable to see the woman who'd saved me, banned from supporting her because my family had poisoned even this. I hired a private investigator the next day, a former FBI agent named Morrison who specialized in harassment cases. Within a week, had documented an overwhelming pattern of stalking and defamation, but he also uncovered something far more disturbing. Delilah had done this before, Morrison revealed, spreading crime scene photos across his desk like a prosecutor building a case. Warren's first wife, my mother, hadn't just left because the marriage failed. She'd fled to escape Delilah's systematic campaign to destroy her reputation and sanity. Morrison's investigation revealed financial records showing Delilah had married my father specifically for his money, with a prenuptial agreement that gave her nothing in divorce but everything if Warren died. Trent was being groomed to inherit the entire estate, and my inheritance had been strategically attacked to increase their share of the family wealth. This wasn't just favoritism or cruelty, it was calculated financial warfare with my future as collateral damage. I came closer to breaking than I'd ever been in my life. The stress cost me 15 pounds I couldn't afford to lose, my clothes hanging loose on a frame that felt like it might shatter. Garrett ended our relationship over dinner at a restaurant where we'd had our first date, unable to handle the drama that followed me like a curse, and I couldn't even blame him for escaping while he could. I sat on my apartment floor one night, seriously considering whether I should just change my name, move across the country, disappear into anonymity, and let them win. The thought of quitting my job, abandoning everything I'd built, just to escape their relentless attacks, felt almost peaceful, Almost. The morning I planned to submit my resignation, Lorraine Chen, a senior partner at my firm, called me into her corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. She was 55, sharply dressed, with a reputation for being brilliant and ruthless in equal measure. I expected her to accept my resignation before I even offered it, but instead she closed the door and said something that changed everything. "I had a stepmother like yours," she began quietly, her usually stern face softening with understanding. "I know exactly what you're going through. I survived it, and you will too." The firm's investigation had completely cleared me of all accusations, she explained, and their IT department had traced the anonymous email to an IP address in Austin, Texas. "More importantly," Lorraine continued, leaning forward with intensity in her eyes, "stopping defending yourself and start building, because success is the best revenge you'll ever get." She offered me something that felt like a lifeline disguised as an opportunity, a spot on a major deal involving a tech startup acquisition worth $200 million. It was the kind of project that could make or break a career, high profile and high stakes, exactly the wrong time to bring on someone who'd been under investigation weeks earlier. But Lorraine believed in me, or maybe she just recognized herself in my situation, and she was willing to bet her own reputation that it'd deliver. I threw myself into the work with the focus of someone who had everything to prove and nothing left to lose, working 18-hour days and sleeping in my office more often than my apartment. The work became my armor, my weapon, my proof that I was more than their lies could ever make me. 3 days into the project, I received a text from an unknown number that simply said, "It's Maeve. In the city. Can we meet?" My sister had secretly taken the train from Austin, lying to our father about visiting a friend, risking Delilah's wrath to see me. We met in a coffee shop in Brooklyn where no one would recognize us, and she slid a USB drive across the table with shaking hands. "I've been documenting everything," she whispered, her eyes darting to the door like she expected Delilah to burst through any moment. The drive contained recordings of Delilah coaching Trent on what lies to post about me, text messages between Delilah and Warren showing how she manipulated him to cut me out, and financial records that proved Delilah had a secret shopping addiction she was hiding from our father. Credit cards I didn't know existed maxed out to $70,000. Money taken from Warren's business accounts to cover Trent's legal expenses after his first DUI, a pattern of theft that would destroy her if exposed. But the real opportunity came from the deal I was working. The acquisition target was a tech startup called Neuralink AI, founded by a brilliant 26-year-old named Julian Martinez who'd developed revolutionary AI technology for healthcare applications. The company was valued at $10 million but desperately needed $5 million in capital to scale, and investors were skeptical about the risk profile. I saw something everyone else missed, a gap in the market that Neuralink could dominate, a technology that could genuinely save lives while generating massive returns. I made a decision that was either genius or insane, possibly both. I used my $400,000 inheritance, the money my family had tried to steal, as a partial investment, then convinced 2 other investors I'd cultivated relationships with to pool resources until we hit $5 million total. The deal structure gave me 30% equity for organizing the investment and bringing business expertise they desperately needed. Every mentor I respected told me I was crazy, too young, risking too much. But I'd already lost everything that mattered. What was money compared to that? I worked like someone possessed, bringing 18-hour days at my regular job, plus another 6 hours building Neuralink every night and weekend. I contributed business strategy, helped navigate FDA regulations that would have buried them, brought in partnerships with hospital systems that gave them credibility they couldn't have bought. Within 6 months, the company grew from 10 employees working in a converted warehouse to 50 people in a real office, with revenue jumping from $0 to $2 million monthly. Major hospital systems began pilot programs, pharmaceutical companies started acquisition conversations, and the valuation climbed steadily upward. Meanwhile, back in Texas, Trent failed out of community college after 1 semester and got arrested for his second DUI, costing Warren $50,000 in legal fees and mandatory rehab that wouldn't work because Trent didn't think he had a problem. Delilah blamed everyone except her son, calling it bad influences and bad luck, never acknowledging that she'd raised an entitled disaster who'd never faced consequences for anything. 1 year after my graduation, Neuralink's valuation jumped to $80 million after a major pharmaceutical company expressed serious acquisition interest. My 30% equity stake was suddenly worth $24 million on paper, though I was still living in my modest Lower East Side apartment and working 100-hour weeks to prove the valuation was justified. I hadn't told my family anything about my success, maintaining minimal contact that consisted of ignoring most calls and responding to texts with single words when absolutely necessary. The strategy of becoming boring and unavailable had finally brought me peace, or at least the absence of active warfare, which felt close enough to count. That peace shattered with a phone call at 3 a.m, my father's voice breaking with what sounded like genuine emotion. "Your mother had a stroke," he said, and for a confused moment I thought he meant Delilah before remembering he was talking about Ramona, my biological mother who divorced him 16 years ago and moved to Oregon with her new husband. "She's in critical condition and asking for you," Warren continued, his voice thick with tears that might have been real. I didn't question, just threw clothes in a bag and caught the first flight to Portland with my heart hammering against my ribs. At the hospital, I discovered the stroke had been relatively minor. Her prognosis was excellent, full recovery expected within weeks. But something about the timing felt wrong, the way the nurses seemed surprised when I mentioned my father had called it critical. The confusion on my mother's face when I burst into her room expecting to say goodbye. That wrongness crystallized into certainty when Warren and Delilah appeared at the hospital 6 hours later, claiming they'd flown up to support me in my time of crisis. Delilah's performance was Oscar-worthy, playing the concerned stepmother with trembling hands and worried eyes, asking doctors questions she already knew the answers to because this had never been about my mother's health. Warren pulled me aside in the hospital cafeteria with coffee neither of us wanted and finally revealed the real reason for this elaborate setup. His oil company was facing serious financial problems, he explained. Not bankruptcy exactly, but severe cash flow issues that threatened everything he'd built. He needed an emergency capital injection of $3 million, and since I was doing so well in finance, surely I could help my own father avoid losing his life's work. The manipulation had layers like a rotten onion that revealed new stench with every peel. Delilah's tears about how wrong they'd been regarding my graduation, Warren's vulnerability as he described losing everything, Trent's clearly rehearsed apology, delivered while checking his phone every 30 seconds like he had somewhere better to be. Maeve was there too, texting me frantically under the table, warning me it was a trap, that the company wasn't actually in trouble, that this was coordinated specifically to extract money from me. Extended family members I hadn't spoken to in 2 years suddenly appeared at the hospital, aunts and uncles taking turns pulling me aside to remind me that family takes care of family, that after everything Warren had done for me growing up, surely I owed him this support. The phrase, "everything he did for you," was repeated like a prayer or a curse, as if providing basic necessities for a child had created was some extraordinary sacrifice that indebted me for life. I hired a forensic accountant that same day, paying for rush service to examine Warren's business finances while I stalled my family with vague promises to consider their request. The accountant's report arrived 48 hours later and confirmed exactly what Maeve had warned me about. The company wasn't bankrupt or even close. Warren had significant assets hidden in offshore accounts that Delilah didn't know existed, proving he didn't trust his own wife with full financial transparency. The real problem was that Delilah's shopping addiction and Trent's legal fees had drained all liquid cash reserves, and Warren was too proud or too weak to admit he couldn't control his own household spending. The $3 million wouldn't save a failing business. It would cover up years of financial dysfunction and enable the same destructive patterns to continue indefinitely. The pressure campaign intensified to levels that felt like psychological warfare. Daily calls from different family members, each taking a turn, trying guilt, anger, manipulation, or pleading depending on who they thought I'd respond to best. Social media posts from Delilah that were vague enough to avoid defamation, but clear enough that anyone who knew our situation understood. She was calling me selfish and cruel. My childhood friends received messages asking them to talk sense into me. My church community from years ago got recruited to remind me about honoring thy father. Even old teachers from high school were somehow contacted and convinced to send me disappointed emails. The campaign was coordinated and relentless, designed to break me through sheer exhaustion if nothing else worked. I agreed to one final family meeting in Austin, but on my terms this time. I flew in with my attorney and financial advisor, requested that all extended family members attend, including the aunts and uncles who'd been pressuring me, and chose a neutral location at a conference room I rented specifically for this purpose. When everyone was assembled, I presented the forensic accounting report with the calm professionalism I'd learned in business school, showing exactly where the money had gone and why the company didn't actually need my investment. Then I offered Warren real help: financial planning services, budget restructuring, business consulting, everything except cash that would disappear into Delilah's shopping bags and Trent's legal defense funds. The evidence of Delilah's secret spending filled a projection screen that couldn't be ignored or explained away. 70,000 in hidden debt, forged signatures on credit applications, money taken from business accounts and funneled to personal use that technically qualified as embezzlement. Warren's face went through expressions I'd never seen before. Shock melting into shame, melting into a realization so profound it seemed to age him 10 years in 10 seconds. The extended family members who'd been pressuring me sat in stunned silence, finally seeing the truth they'd refused to acknowledge because it was easier to blame me than confront Delilah's destruction. But Delilah herself had no shame left to access. Her mask didn't crack, it exploded. She started screaming accusations that made no sense, calling me a liar and a thief, throwing her purse at the projection screen, threatening to sue me for defamation even as the evidence of her fraud filled the room. When Warren tried to speak, she turned on him with venom I'd only seen directed at me before, screeching about betrayal and humiliation, demanding he choose between his wife and his ungrateful daughter. Trent jumped to his mother's defense with threats of violence that got him escorted out by building security, his phone recording everything for social media, even as he was being removed. The aftermath was quieter than I expected, almost anticlimactic after Delilah's explosion. Extended family members approached me one by one with apologies that felt genuine but came years too late, admitting they'd been manipulated, they'd believed lies because it was easier than investigating truth. Warren sat alone in a corner after Delilah stormed out, staring at his hands like they belonged to a stranger, processing the reality that his wife had been stealing from him while convincing him to steal from his daughter. Maeve hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, crying with relief that someone had finally spoken the truth out loud where everyone could hear it. Only my father remained silent, and that silence felt louder than any apology he could have offered because we both knew words couldn't repair what had been broken between us. Delilah's final act before leaving Austin wasn't violence or vandalism. It was a promise delivered through text message at 2 a.m. "You'll regret this," she wrote with the calm certainty of someone who'd already planned their revenge. "I destroyed your mother, I'll destroy you too, and this time everyone will believe me because I've learned from my mistakes." I blocked the number but couldn't block the chill that ran through me, knowing that someone who'd lost everything now had nothing left to lose, which made them infinitely more dangerous than they'd been before. 2 weeks after exposing Delilah in Austin, I returned to New York, believing the worst was finally over, that truth had won some kind of victory, even if it came at tremendous cost. Neuralink was preparing for serious acquisition talks with 3 different pharmaceutical companies. My personal life was stabilizing after months of chaos, and it even started dating again cautiously. A software engineer named Blake had asked me to dinner twice, and I'd said yes both times, letting myself imagine a future where family drama wasn't the defining feature of my existence. That fragile hope lasted exactly 9 days before a process server appeared at my office with legal documents that turned my blood to ice water. Delilah was suing me for $5 million, claiming defamation, emotional distress, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and slander based on the family meeting where I'd exposed her fraud. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of creative fiction, claiming I'd forged the financial documents, spread malicious lies to destroy her marriage, and engaged in a calculated campaign of harassment designed to turn the family against her. Her attorney had crafted a narrative where she was the victim of a vindictive stepdaughter who couldn't accept her father's happiness, painting me as a manipulative liar who'd fabricated evidence out of jealousy and spite. Local Texas media picked up the story because wealthy family lawsuits always generated clicks, running sympathetic profiles of Delilah that showed her crying about how her stepdaughter had destroyed her life and stolen her family. The professional consequences arrived faster than I could have imagined possible. Neuralink's investors called an emergency board meeting to discuss my continued involvement, with several members arguing it'd become too much of a liability to keep in a leadership position. The pharmaceutical companies interested in acquisition suddenly needed more time to consider their offers, citing concerns about reputational risk and unclear leadership structure. My venture capital firm, which had stood by me through the previous investigations, now faced pressure from other partners who worried about the firm's image being tarnished by association. Lorraine fought for me behind closed doors. I heard her voice raised in arguments through conference room walls, but even she admitted the optics were becoming impossible to manage. Delilah hadn't just filed a lawsuit. She'd launched a coordinated media campaign with the sophistication of a corporate PR firm, because that's exactly what She'd hired. My private investigator discovered She'd somehow scraped together money to retain a reputation management company that specialized in destroying people online, and they were earning every penny. Trent's TikTok videos about his evil half-sister went viral with hundreds of thousands of views, each one more creative than the last in portraying me as a monster who'd attacked his poor mother out of pure malice. Death threats started arriving in my email and Instagram DMs, strangers who knew nothing about the situation but had decided I was evil based on 30-second videos. Someone leaked my home address online, and I had to move apartments in the middle of the night after finding threatening notes slipped under my door. The cost of defending myself was mounting exponentially, legal fees already exceeding $100,000 with no end in sight, my savings being consumed by a war I'd never wanted to fight. Warren called with an offer that felt like the final betrayal in a long series of betrayals that had defined our relationship. If you drop the financial accusations against Delilah publicly, she'll drop the lawsuit, he said with the tone of someone proposing a reasonable business transaction rather than asking me to lie about documented theft. I refused immediately, my voice shaking with rage I could barely contain, pointing out that She'd stolen from him, that the evidence was irrefutable, that asking me to pretend otherwise was asking me to participate in my own destruction. His response broke something in me that I hadn't known was still intact. I knew about the spending, he admitted quietly, the confession of a weak man who'd enabled abuse through inaction. I allowed it because I was afraid of being alone. I chose comfort over you, and I've been doing it for years. He told me things I'd suspected, but never wanted confirmed. That had known Delilah was turning the family against me but found it easier to go along than confront her. That had watched her destroy my reputation and done nothing because stopping her would have required courage he didn't possess. The money she spent was my permission to avoid dealing with her, he explained, with the logic of someone who'd convinced himself cowardice was actually strategy. But even after confessing his complicity, even after admitting Head failed me as a father in every meaningful way, he still wouldn't publicly support me against her lawsuit. It would make things worse, he said. The eternal excuse of people who let bad things happen through inaction. His final words felt like a door closing on any possibility of relationship we might have salvaged. Maybe it's best if we're not in contact for a while, he suggested, as if mutual separation was somehow different from him, abandoning his daughter to fight alone against the monster Head brought into our family. I sat in my new apartment, bare and anonymous, because I'd moved with only essentials, surrounded by boxes I didn't have energy to unpack. Legal fees were approaching $200,000 with the lawsuit just beginning, my career hanging by threads that frayed more each day, my reputation shredded across social media platforms I couldn't control. Extended family members who'd apologized 2 weeks ago had gone silent again, afraid of being pulled into Delilah's crossfire, proving that their support had always been conditional on it, not costing them anything. I considered disappearing, changing my name, moving somewhere no one had heard of me, just surrendering to the reality that some battles couldn't be won no matter how right you were. The thought of giving up felt almost peaceful in its finality, like accepting defeat would at least mean the fighting could stop. My godmother, Celeste, recovered from her heart attack and fiercer than ever, appeared at my door without warning because Maeve had called her worried I was giving up. She took one look at my face and said something that cut through the fog of despair. "Your grandmother didn't raise a quitter," she stated firmly, pulling me into a hug that smelled like the lavender perfume she'd worn my entire life. "She would want you to fight, not for them, but for yourself, because letting them win means letting them define your worth forever." That night, my legal team discovered that Delilah's lawsuit was built almost entirely on provable lies. Statements she'd made under oath that contradicted documented evidence, claims that fell apart under basic scrutiny. We filed a countersuit for malicious prosecution, abuse of process, and fraud, attaching every piece of evidence we'd accumulated over months of documentation. A journalist friend wrote an investigative piece titled "The Real Story Behind the Lawsuit" that methodically dismantled Delilah's narrative and exposed her pattern of manipulation. Warren's business associates, who had witnessed her behavior for years, started coming forward with their own stories of her cruelty and deception. Public opinion, fickle as always, began shifting in my direction. And then, in the middle of personal chaos that threatened to consume everything I'd built, professional miracle arrived in the form of a phone call from Neuralink's CEO, Julian. A major pharmaceutical company had made a firm acquisition offer of $300 million, valuing the company at more than triple our highest projections. My 30% equity stake, which I'd risked my entire inheritance to acquire, was suddenly worth $90 million before taxes and fees. After accounting for capital gains, taxes, and legal expenses, it'd net approximately $50 million when the deal closed in 30 days. Julian's voice cracked with emotion as he thanked me for believing in him when no one else would, for contributing business expertise that had been as valuable as capital, for building something that would genuinely help people while making us all wealthy, beyond imagination. I hung up the phone and sat in silence, processing the reality that I now had the resources to fight back against anything Delilah could throw at me, that I'd never have to worry about money again, that I'd won in the most complete and undeniable way possible. 3 months after the acquisition closed, I maintained strict silence about my newfound wealth, letting only my closest allies know the truth, while everyone else continued assuming I was a moderately successful analyst, struggling under legal fees. The strategic silence was intentional, a calculated decision to let my enemies underestimate me while I built infrastructure they couldn't attack or destroy. I continued working at the venture capital firm, began investing in 3 more promising startups, with the pattern recognition I'd developed at Neuralink, and purchased 2 investment properties in Brooklyn that would generate passive income while appreciating in value. Financial discipline became my religion, living well below my means while building wealth that would compound for generations. The penthouse in Tribeca appeared in my real estate agent's email with the subject line "Dream Home Alert." And even the photos took my breath away. $5 million bought 5,000 square feet of luxury, 3 bedrooms with floor-to-ceiling windows, a terrace that overlooked Manhattan like a kingdom I'd conquered through sheer stubborn survival, and finishes that belonged in architectural magazines. The master bathroom was larger than my first studio apartment. The kitchen had appliances I didn't know how to use. The wine cellar could hold collections worth more than most people's annual salaries. I toured it once and made an offer immediately, paying cash because I could, because the little girl who'd sat alone at her graduation deserved to live somewhere that reflected her worth even if her family never had. Designer furniture, original art pieces, custom built-ins that cost more than cars. I furnished that penthouse like I was creating a sanctuary from every year it'd been made to feel small. 2 different publications requested features on the space. Architectural Digest wanted to showcase the interior design, while Business Insider wanted to profile the rising venture capitalist who could afford such luxury before turning 30. I agreed to both, understanding that strategic visibility would serve my purposes better than continued hiding. The photo shoots took 3 days, professional crews transforming my home into something that looked almost unreal in its perfection. And I sat for interviews where I carefully crafted the narrative I wanted told. They asked about my success, and I told them about Neuralink, about seeing potential others missed, about working 100-hour weeks to build something meaningful. They asked about my background, and I mentioned growing up in Texas, getting my MBA from Columbia. But I didn't mention the empty seats at graduation or the family that had tried to destroy me. That part of the story could wait for the right moment. Meanwhile, my legal team was systematically dismantling Delilah's lawsuit with the precision of surgeons removing a tumor. The judge had dismissed most of her claims with prejudice after reviewing evidence that proved her accusations were fabricated, and our countersuit was gaining momentum as more witnesses came forward. Delilah was ordered to pay $200,000 in my legal fees and damages, a judgment she couldn't begin to satisfy because she'd already filed for bankruptcy, trying to escape her credit card debt. Warren quietly paid the settlement to protect what remained of the family name, another transaction where money substituted for actually addressing the dysfunction that had caused the damage. Trent's social media accounts got suspended for terms of service violations after I hired a legal team that documented every threatening and false statement he'd made, and the restraining order I'd filed was extended to require he stay 1,000 feet away from me at all times. Family dynamics were shifting in ways I watched from a distance, like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture I'd once belonged to. Maeve had been accepted to NYU with a full scholarship she'd earned through her own merit, and I offered to pay for everything the scholarship didn't cover: tuition, room and board, spending money, everything, so she could escape Texas without the financial stress that had defined my own college experience. She moved into the Penthouse's guest suite while apartment hunting, and our relationship deepened as we processed shared trauma and built something healthier than what we'd known growing up. Warren's marriage to Delilah was collapsing under the weight of exposed lies and bankruptcy proceedings, divorce papers filed after 18 years of dysfunction masquerading as family. Trent, now 19, was still living at home with no job prospects and no ambition beyond his phone screen, the golden child revealed as fool's gold under scrutiny. Extended family members started reaching out again with apologies that ranged from genuine to self-serving. Cousins and aunts and uncles admitting they'd been manipulated by Delilah's lies, but also positioning themselves to benefit from my success now that it was undeniable. I remained polite but distant, understanding that trust destroyed couldn't be rebuilt with words alone, that their absence during my worst moments told me everything I needed to know about who they were when supporting me cost them something. Only a few relationships felt worth salvaging: my Aunt Rita, who'd sent me money during college without telling anyone; my cousin Jasper, who'd texted me privately to say he never believed the lies; people who'd shown up in small ways when no one was watching. The Business Insider profile published on a Thursday morning with the headline, "From Forgotten Daughter to Tech Millionaire: How Sloan Bennett Built an Empire." The article detailed my entire journey: the graduation my family missed, the inheritance they tried to steal, the lawsuit designed to destroy me, all of it told with journalistic objectivity that let readers draw their own conclusions about who the villains were. My net worth was listed as approximately $50 million, with the detail that I'd turned a $400,000 inheritance into generational wealth through strategic risk and relentless work. Photos of the penthouse accompanied the article, each room more stunning than the last, visual proof that I'd succeeded beyond anything my family had thought possible. Within 48 hours, the article had been viewed 7 million times, shared across every social media platform, discussed on financial podcasts and business shows as an inspirational story of overcoming adversity. Warren's business associates forwarded him the article within minutes of publication, and I imagine him reading it alone in his office, confronting the reality of everything he'd lost by choosing wrong people over the daughter who'd actually been worth believing in. Delilah saw it at her lawyer's office during divorce proceedings, and according to witnesses threw her phone hard enough to crack the screen, screaming about theft and lies even as the evidence of my legitimate success stared back from the shattered glass. Trent's friends mocked him mercilessly online, commenting on every old post about his sister being a failure, with screenshots of her penthouse and net worth. The golden child exposed as the actual disappointment had always been. Extended family shared the article with captions ranging from proud to defensive, some claiming they'd always known I'd succeed, while others scrambled to explain why they'd believed the lies. Warren appeared at my office building the following Monday, dressed in the suit he wore to important meetings, looking older and more diminished than I remembered. Security called up to inform me that my father was in the lobby requesting to see me, and I made a decision that surprised even myself by how easy it felt. "Tell him I'm not available," I instructed calmly. No anger in my voice, because anger requires caring enough to feel heat. Warren waited in that lobby for 6 hours, according to security logs, sitting in an uncomfortable modern chair like penance, before finally accepting I wasn't going to change my mind. He sent a handwritten letter later that week, 20 pages of apologies and admissions and taking responsibility for every failure, begging for a chance to rebuild something from the ruins of our relationship. I read it once, felt exhaustion where I'd expected pain, and filed it away in a drawer I didn't plan to open again. Delilah made one final desperate attempt, showing up at the Penthouse building and demanding the doorman grant her access, claiming she was family and had every right to see me. The doorman, trained in dealing with exactly these situations in a building where every resident had money, and therefore stalkers, firmly denied entry and called police when she refused to leave. Delilah's scene was spectacular, according to witnesses, screaming about stolen money and ungrateful stepdaughters while being arrested for trespassing and harassment. The restraining order I'd filed was extended with prejudice, and local news outlets covered the incident with headlines like "Woman Arrested at Millionaire's Building," completing her transformation from sympathetic victim to publicly recognized problem. Her reputation in Austin social circles, already damaged by exposed financial fraud, was now completely destroyed by visible unhinged behavior that no one could excuse or explain away. I hosted a housewarming party 6 months after moving into the Penthouse with a guest list that read like a curated collection of everyone who'd supported me when it cost them something to do so. Colleagues from my firm, investors I'd built relationships with, friends who'd stood by me through legal warfare, and chosen family who'd proven more reliable than blood ever had. Maeve served as co-host, glowing with the confidence that came from escaping toxicity and building a life based on her own merit at NYU. Celeste, my godmother who'd attended my graduation alone and fought for me when no one else would, was guest of honor, her toast bringing tears to eyes throughout the room. Lorraine, my mentor who'd believed in me when my job was threatened, raised her glass and said something that became the theme of the evening. "To women who rise despite those who try to bury them," she announced, her voice carrying across the terrace where city lights sparkled like promise. "May we recognize each other and lift as we climb." Notably absent from the celebration were Warren, Delilah, and Trent, though their absence felt more like presence through negative space, a reminder of everything I'd survived to reach this moment. Professional photographers captured the evening for the Architectural Digest feature, images that would appear in print alongside an interview about design choices and the journey to affording such luxury. The article would present a sanitized version of my story, focused on professional success rather than family dysfunction, but the subtext was clear to anyone who'd followed my journey online. Every photo of that penthouse was evidence that I'd built something beautiful from the ashes of relationships that had tried to consume me. The podcast interview I gave 2 weeks later was less sanitized and more deliberate in its message. The host specialized in stories about overcoming adversity, and I'd chosen his platform specifically because his audience would understand the nuances of family estrangement without needing explicit details. I discussed betrayal without naming names, talked about building success alone without specifying why I'd been alone, explained the process of learning that blood doesn't obligate you to accept abuse. The message was clear to anyone who wanted to hear it. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you deserve, and choosing yourself over people who hurt you isn't selfish, it's survival. The podcast hit #1 on charts within 3 days, downloaded 2 million times in the first week, and suddenly I was being invited to speak at universities, conferences, and corporate events about resilience and building wealth after trauma. Extended family members, watching all of this unfold from Texas, finally organized an intervention with Warren that had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with their own discomfort with his failures. His brother confronted him with brutal honesty about destroying his relationship with his daughter. His sister brought documentation of every time Head chosen Delilah over me. His own mother's friends from before she passed reminded him that she would be ashamed of how Head treated her granddaughter. The family pressure came from self-interest as much as righteousness. They wanted to be able to claim connection to my success without the stain of having enabled my destruction. But the result was the same. Warren was forced to face consequences. His wealth and avoidance had let him escape for years, sitting in an uncomfortable truth that money couldn't buy his way out of this time. Trent's downfall was swift and entirely self-inflicted. Arrested for his second DUI with drugs in his car and facing serious jail time because Texas didn't look kindly on repeat offenders. Warren refused to pay legal fees this time, either because Head finally learned that enabling helped no one, or because Delilah's divorce had drained resources Head once had available for bail money. Trent called me from jail with the entitlement of someone who'd never been told no, demanding I help him because I was rich now and family was supposed to support each other. My response was calm and final. You mocked me at my graduation. You posted lies about me online. You filmed me being harassed at a hospital and laughed about it. The answer is no now and forever. His rage was predictable and recorded. Threats and insults that revealed his true character so completely that even his own lawyer advised the judge to consider them as evidence of his lack of remorse. Trent received the maximum sentence of 2 years in jail, and Delilah sent me hateful messages blaming me for her son's imprisonment as if I'd forced him to drive drunk with illegal substances. Warren did something I never expected by writing an op-ed for the Austin newspaper titled, "How I Failed My Daughter," a public confession that detailed his weakness, Delilah's manipulation, and his own choices that had destroyed our relationship. He took full responsibility without caveat or excuse, admitting Head chosen comfort over his child, that Head enabled abuse through silence, that Head valued peace in his marriage more than protecting his daughter from systematic destruction. The article generated intense response from readers, some praising his accountability while others saw it as too little too late, but his business associates respected the honesty, even as his social circle divided over whether confession equaled redemption. Warren's reputation transformed overnight from successful businessman to cautionary tale about the cost of choosing wrong. I didn't contact Warren directly after reading his op-ed, but I released a brief statement through my publicist that acknowledged his words without offering forgiveness. I recognize his accountability, the statement read carefully. Healing takes time, and some wounds don't close on timelines anyone else can dictate. I wish him well in his journey and ask for privacy in mine. It was the most generous response I could offer, leaving a door not quite closed but certainly not open, creating space for the possibility of future relationship without obligating myself to provide it. What I focused on instead was building my own empire, independent of anyone's redemption arc, launching my own venture capital firm called Phoenix Rising Capital with an initial fund of $20 million, focused specifically on investing in women-led startups and underdog founders who reminded me of myself. The business success exceeded even optimistic projections, investing in 12 companies during the first year, with 4 already showing trajectory toward major exits. Forbes featured me in their 30 Under 30 issue, even though I was 29, close enough to count, profiling my investment strategy and the returns I'd generated for clients who'd trusted me with their capital. Harvard Business School invited me to speak to their MBA program, and I stood in a lecture hall similar to where I'd earned my own degree, looking out at students who had no idea what it cost some people to get there. The invitation felt like full circle completion, validation that I'd built something meaningful from the ruins of a graduation my family couldn't be bothered to attend. Delilah made one final attempt at revenge by trying to sell a tell-all book about me to any publisher who'd listen, but her proposal was rejected universally because her story couldn't survive basic fact-checking. Every claim she made contradicted documented evidence. Every accusation fell apart under scrutiny, and publishers weren't interested in defending defamation lawsuits for a story no one believed. She attempted to sue me again, filing paperwork that was dismissed within days by a judge who noted this was her third frivolous lawsuit and warned that future filings would result in being declared a vexatious litigant banned from Texas courts. The restraining order was extended indefinitely, requiring her to stay 1,000 feet away from me at all times, and she finally moved to a different state when even her own family stopped taking her calls. Her last communication was a text message that simply said, "You'll never be happy, you stole my life," sent from a number I blocked immediately without responding, because she'd already taken enough of my energy and attention to last a lifetime. Maeve thrived at NYU, studying psychology with focus on family trauma and financial abuse, processing our shared history through academic understanding that gave language to experiences Wed thought were uniquely ours. She maintained complicated relationship with Warren that I didn't interfere with, understanding that she had to navigate her own healing separate from mine, but she never pressured me to reconcile or suggested my boundaries were too harsh. Her gratitude was constant and freely expressed. "You saved my life by showing me I could leave," she told me often, usually while we cooked dinner together in the Penthouse kitchen. "Without your example, I would have thought staying was the only option." Her plan to write her thesis on financial abuse and family scapegoating would use our story as case study with names changed, transforming our pain into research that might help others recognize patterns before they caused irreparable damage. The unexpected encounter happened at a Manhattan charity gala where Id purchased a table for Phoenix Rising Capital, dressed in a gown that cost more than my first car, and wearing confidence like armor Id forged in fire. Warren attended the same event, neither of us knowing the other would be there, and we made eye contact across a ballroom full of New York's wealthiest elite. He didn't approach, respecting the boundaries I'd established, but he nodded acknowledgement of my presence before leaving early to avoid making me uncomfortable. The single text he sent afterward simply said, "You look happy, I'm glad." That's all I wanted to say, and I read it without responding but felt something soften incrementally in my chest. Not forgiveness, but perhaps the possibility that one day forgiveness might be possible if he continued doing the work without expecting reward for basic human decency. 2 years after purchasing the Penthouse, Phoenix Rising Capital managed a $100 million fund across 15 successful investments, with 3 major exits that generated returns exceeding 300% for our clients. My personal net worth had grown to approximately $80 million through careful investment and the kind of financial discipline that came from remembering what it felt like to have nothing. I contributed regularly to Harvard Business Review and Forbes, was recognized as a thought leader in venture capital, and had speaking requests booked out 18 months in advance from organizations that wanted to understand how Ed built success from betrayal without becoming bitter in the process. The healing journey wasn't linear or simple, but it was happening in ways I could finally recognize and celebrate. I'd been in a relationship with Malcolm Chen, a fellow investor I'd met at a conference, for over a year, and what we'd built together was based on friendship and respect rather than trauma bonding or desperation. He knew my whole story because I'd told him early, not as a test but as honesty about who I was and what I'd survived, and he loved me anyway without trying to fix or save me from past I'd already survived. Malcolm's family embraced me with warmth that felt foreign and healing, showing me what healthy family dynamics looked like, demonstrating that not everyone weaponized love or made acceptance conditional on performance. We talked about marriage eventually, but without rush, both focused on partnership rather than timelines someone else had decided we should follow. Chosen family had become my real family in ways that mattered more than genetics ever could. Maeve and I had weekly dinners that sometimes involved cooking elaborate meals and sometimes involved ordering takeout and watching movies, building sister relationship based on adult choice rather than childhood obligation. Celeste visited New York frequently, staying in the guest suite and filling the penthouse with her energy and lavender perfume. The godmother who'd attended my graduation, becoming grandmother to the life I'd built after. Lorraine transitioned from mentor to close friend and business advisor, someone who understood my drive because she'd walked similar path decades earlier. My friend group consisted of successful women who supported each other without competition, who celebrated victories and showed up during struggles, Who'd created annual chosen family Thanksgiving tradition that felt more like real holiday than any childhood memory I carried. Columbia Business School invited me to be commencement speaker 3 years after I'd sat alone at my own graduation, and the invitation felt like the universe's sense of poetic justice. I stood at the same podium where the dean had stood when handing me my diploma, looking out at 500 graduating students and their families filling seats that stretched back into darkness. My speech was titled Building Success from Betrayal, because I'd learned that sanitizing pain didn't help anyone, that the students who needed to hear my message were the ones sitting alone in audiences like I'd been, the ones whose families hadn't come, or didn't understand, or actively undermined their achievements. The people who should celebrate you but aren't worth your energy. I told them with conviction earned through experience. Build your own cheering section, from people who show up when it costs them something, because that's the family that matters. The standing ovation lasted long enough to make me uncomfortable, and afterward dozens of students approached with stories about their own family estrangement, their own experiences being overlooked or dismissed or actively sabotaged. One young woman, barely holding back tears, told me that her parents hadn't come to graduation either, and she felt broken until hearing my speech gave her permission to be angry about it. Your story made me believe I could still make it even though they don't believe in me, she said. And I hugged her while remembering my own devastation 3 years earlier, transforming my pain into purpose for someone else who needed to know they weren't alone. Warren had continued sending monthly letters that I sometimes read and sometimes left unopened depending on my emotional capacity, updates about his life that never pressured me for response or relationship. One letter included documentation showing he'd put $2 million into trust for me with my name on it. Not to buy forgiveness, he wrote, but because it's what I should have done decades ago and am finally strong enough to choose right even when it costs me. The gesture didn't erase years of choosing wrong, but it represented genuine change rather than manipulation, a father slowly learning to value his daughter's welfare over his own comfort. Another letter revealed, he'd established scholarship fund at my high school for first-generation college students from difficult family situations, naming it after his mother, and contributing $50,000 annually to help kids who reminded him of the daughter had failed. The unexpected coffee meeting happened during a business trip to Austin 3 years after moving to New York, when I walked into a downtown cafe and found Warren already there, in genuine coincidence that shocked us both. He stood immediately but didn't approach, his body language screaming uncertainty about whether he'd walk out or stay. I paused at the threshold with my hand on the door, engaging in rapid internal debate about whether I had emotional energy for this encounter, and then surprised myself by walking over to his table and saying, "Hello, Dad," in a voice that was steady rather than warm. We talked for 30 minutes about surface-level topics, the weather, and Austin's growth, and his business recovery, carefully avoiding depth that neither of us was prepared to navigate. His eyes were wet when we parted, and his voice broke slightly when he thanked me for those 30 minutes because he didn't deserve them. "I'm not ready for more," I told him honestly. "Maybe someday, or maybe never. But I'm at peace either way, and that's what matters most to me now." We left with uncertain future and no promises, but with less anger than had existed before, which felt like its own form of progress. The real wisdom it gained wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about understanding that their absence had been the gift I didn't know I needed at the time. Standing on my penthouse terrace, watching sunset turn Manhattan gold, I reflected on the journey from forgotten daughter to self-made success, recognizing that the graduation they missed was actually the moment I started building my real life free from their judgment and limitations. The key lesson wasn't that I'd proven something to them. It was that I'd built everything for myself and their opinions had stopped mattering somewhere along the way. The success wasn't revenge. It was liberation, freedom from needing their validation to know my own worth. I'd started the Forgotten Daughters Fund the previous year, a foundation providing scholarships for first-generation college students from dysfunctional families, therapy grants for adult children escaping family abuse, and mentorship programs connecting successful professionals with young people who needed examples of thriving after trauma. The first year we helped 50 students, providing not just money but community and proof that family rejection wasn't permanent judgment on their value. I personally mentored 10 scholarship recipients, meeting with them monthly to discuss everything from career strategy to setting boundaries with toxic relatives, sharing hard-won wisdom about surviving and eventually thriving after being forgotten by people who should have remembered. The annual retreat we organized brought together all recipients for weekend of workshops and connection, creating network of people who understood that chosen family could be stronger than biological accident. 3 years after the Penthouse purchase and the article that had changed everything, Maeve called with news that Warren had suffered heart attack and was asking for me from his hospital bed. The decision to visit wasn't automatic or easy, requiring me to interrogate my motivations and capacity for engaging with someone who'd hurt me so deeply. I ultimately chose to go, not because I owed him anything but because I needed to know I could face him without falling apart, that my healing was strong enough to withstand proximity to source of old wounds. Warren looked older and frailer in that hospital bed, diminished in ways that went beyond physical health, and our conversation was honest and raw in ways we'd never managed before. "I can't undo it," he said quietly, machines beeping rhythm around his admission. "I can only own it and keep trying to be better than I was." "I forgive you," I told him after long silence. "But that doesn't mean we go back to anything we were before. We can only go forward if we go anywhere at all, and that's not guaranteed." He took my hand briefly and said, "Forward is more than I deserve," and we sat together in uncomfortable peace that wasn't reconciliation but was acknowledgement of reality we both had to live with. The true peace came from realizing I was no longer angry, that the hurt remained but didn't control my decisions or define my identity anymore. I'd built a life so full of genuine love and meaningful work that their absence mattered exponentially less than it once had. Success wasn't measured by their regret or belated recognition. It was measured by my joy and the community I'd created, and the people I could help with resources and wisdom I'd earned. Malcolm proposed on the terrace one evening with city lights spread below us like stars, we'd claimed. A simple question without elaborate production, because he understood I valued substance over performance, and I said yes because I was ready to build my own family based on choice rather than obligation. The foundation event where I gave keynote speech 2 months later filled a ballroom with scholarship recipients, young women who'd been forgotten and dismissed, and told they weren't enough by families who couldn't see their value. I shared my story in full detail for first time publicly, not hiding behind professional sanitization but owning every betrayal and attack and moment I'd nearly given up. "Your family's failure to see your worth doesn't define your value," I told them with conviction that reached back through years of doubt to that day I'd sat alone at graduation. "You define your own value by what you build, and who you become, and how you treat others when you finally have power." The standing ovation felt different from the one at Columbia, because these were my people, young women who understood intimately what it cost to keep going when everyone who should support you actively worked against your success. A young woman approached me afterward, maybe 20 years old, with nervous energy and hope in her eyes, despite obvious recent crying. "My family didn't come to my graduation either," she confessed, in voice that shook with vulnerability. "Your story made me believe I could still make it, even though they don't see me." I hugged her without hesitation, this stranger, who was actually my younger self, and told her the truth I'd learned through fire. "You already are making it because you're here. You survived and you're building something they can't touch or destroy, and that's everything that matters." Watching her walk away with straightened shoulders and lighter step, I understood that this was what all the pain had been for, transforming my betrayal into purpose that could light the way for others walking similar dark paths. The closing wisdom I'd share with anyone facing family rejection or betrayal is this: the Penthouse didn't make them pay attention. It made me realize I didn't need their attention anymore. By the time they noticed my success, I'd moved so far beyond needing their validation that their belated recognition felt hollow and irrelevant. Understanding arrived slowly that revenge is empty but peace is priceless, that they could see my achievements now, but I'd moved past requiring them to witness my worth. I'd built something they couldn't touch, a sense of inner freedom and self-worth that existed independent of their opinions or approval. The message I'd give to anyone struggling with similar pain is simple: you don't owe loyalty to people who showed you none, and sometimes the family you create is infinitely more real than the family you're born into. The last scene I'll leave you with happened on a random Tuesday evening, standing on my terrace with city lights below and Malcolm beside me, when my phone rang with Warren's name on the screen. I looked at it, smiled with genuine peace rather than performance, and sent it to voicemail without anger or guilt. Not because I was punishing him, but because I was at peace with whatever our relationship would or wouldn't become, free from the desperate need for his validation that had defined my younger years. I was already home in every way that mattered, surrounded by people who'd chosen me consistently, living in space I'd created through my own effort, building legacy that would help others long after I was gone. That realization, that I was completely and utterly home without needing them to acknowledge it, was the truest victory I could have ever achieved. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been overlooked by your own family during your biggest achievements? Have you built success despite people who should have supported you? Drop a comment below and share your story, because you're not alone. There's an entire community of us who've learned that chosen family matters more than biology. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel for more real stories about overcoming adversity, and share this video with anyone who needs to hear that family rejection isn't the end. It's sometimes the beginning of building something even better. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of a community that understands that sometimes walking away from toxic family is the bravest and healthiest thing you can do. I'm wishing you peace, success, and the courage to choose yourself even when it's hard. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't determined by who shows up, it's determined by who you become, despite who didn't.